The sound of iron gates slamming shut echoes like thunder through narrow stone corridors. Outside, Paris burns with voices. The air is thick with smoke from torches and the stench of spilled wine mixing with blood. It is September 1792, and France stands on the edge of madness. The monarchy has fallen. Foreign armies march toward the city. Rumors whisper of spies and traitors filling the prisons. Fear has become the breath of the revolution, and fear is about to devour one of the most loyal women in France. Her name is Marie-Thérèse Louise of Savoy. History remembers her as the Princess de Lamballe. She was not a queen, nor a ruler, nor even a woman of ambition. She was a widow, gentle and quiet, whose only crime was devotion to her friend. But on the 3rd of September, she will be dragged before a mob, and her loyalty will be answered with a death so brutal it would haunt an entire nation. To see how her path led here, we must return to the beginning. Born in Turin in 1749, she was the daughter of Louis Victor, Prince of Carignan, of the powerful Savoy family. Her childhood was one of privilege, but also of duty. In the labyrinth of European dynasties, her life was never truly her own. At 17, she was married into France's glittering nobility, wed to Louis-Alexandre de Bourbon, Prince de Lamballe. His fortune was immense, his lineage traced directly to the Sun King himself. For a brief moment, she appeared destined for a life of splendor, a jewel among the gilded halls of Versailles. Yet fate turned swiftly. Her husband was known for his vices, his body ruined by excess. Within a year of their union, he was dead. The young bride was left a widow at just 18. Her grief could have consumed her. Instead, she withdrew into herself, clinging to piety and silence. In the vast and cruel court of Versailles, she appeared almost ghost-like, a figure of gentleness surrounded by intrigue and laughter. It was in this solitude that she found a companion who understood. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born Dauphine, was as foreign and isolated as Lamballe herself. The two were drawn together instantly. In a palace where masks were worn daily, they became to one another real. When Antoinette ascended as queen in 1774, she placed Lamballe not on the margins but at the very center of her household. The title of superintendent of the household gave her intimate access to the queen. She was no longer just a courtier. She was confidant, counselor, and friend. But at Versailles, friendship was never safe. The court watched them with suspicion. Gossip sharpened like a knife. Lamballe's devotion to the queen was twisted into rumors of scandal. Pamphlets filled Paris with accusations of unnatural relationships, corruption, and treachery. It did not matter that these were lies. In times of hunger and resentment, lies grow heavier than truth. By the late 1780s, the people's anger at Marie Antoinette had become unquenchable. Her jewels, her parties, her laughter, all became symbols of waste while bread vanished from markets. And those who stood closest to her shared in her damnation. The Princess de Lamballe was painted as a villainess, the corrupter of the queen, a spy for Austria, a parasite draining the lifeblood of France. When the Bastille fell in 1789, the world she had known was shattered. Nobles fled the kingdom, racing for safety beyond the frontiers. Lamballe too had an escape. She found refuge in London, surrounded by those who urged her to remain, to save her life. But when the Queen sent word, she did not hesitate. She wrote her will, placed her fortune in order, and returned to Paris. Her friends begged her not to go. She refused them all. She would live and die beside Marie Antoinette. In her decision was a strange calm, as though she already knew her fate. The years that followed tested that loyalty and fire. She was present at the disastrous attempt to flee to Varennes in 1791, when the royal family was dragged back in chains. She was there when mobs stormed the Tuileries Palace in June 1792, when the king was forced to wear a red cap of liberty while the crowd howled in triumph. Eyewitnesses remembered Lamballe moving through the chaos, pale and silent, shielding her queen. Again and again, she risked her life, but never faltered. On the 10th of August, the storm broke at last. The monarchy fell. The royal family was imprisoned in the temple. The Princess de Lamballe was seized and thrown into La Force prison. She had walked straight into the heart of darkness. La Force was not merely a prison, it was a breeding ground of terror. Its walls were damp and rotting, its air thick with disease. Prisoners were crammed into cells with barely room to lie down. The city outside seethed with rage. French armies had been defeated. Austrian and Prussian forces marched toward Paris, promising destruction if the royal family was harmed. Instead of bowing to fear, the revolutionaries turned it inward. They were convinced that traitors filled the prisons, waiting for the enemy to arrive. The solution was simple and terrible: kill them all. On the 2nd of September, the massacres began. Crowds of armed men poured into the Abbaye prison, dragging priests into courtyards and cutting them down in droves. The killings spread to Bicêtre, to the Conciergerie, to La Force. For 5 days the city was an open wound. The streets flowed with blood. The bells of Saint-Sulpice tolled, drums beat, and the air was filled with the roar of the crowd. Paris was not a city, it was a slaughterhouse. In her cell, Lamballe heard it all: the shouts, the screams, the blows of steel on flesh. She knew the mob would not be satisfied until they reached her. She was not simply another prisoner, she was the friend of the Queen. She was the symbol of the old order. She was the prize. On the morning of September 3rd, the door opened. Guards entered her cell. They led her to a tribunal hastily assembled within the prison itself. It was not justice, it was performance. A few men sat at a table sticky with spilled wine and stained with blood. Their task was simple: to ask a question and then deliver the victim to the mob. When Lamballe was brought before them, she nearly collapsed at the sight of bodies piled in the courtyard outside. Still, she stood with composure. They asked her if she would swear loyalty to liberty and equality. She answered yes. Then they demanded she swear hatred of the king and queen. She shook her head. She said it was not in her heart. Some accounts recall her words: "I will swear to the first, but not to the second." Others remember her calmly declaring she had already made the sacrifice of her life. It was enough. The judge announced, "Let Madame be set at liberty." To the unknowing, it sounded like freedom, but the words were a death sentence. It was the code used to hand victims to the mob. Guards seized her and thrust her through the doors into the courtyard. What awaited her there was not execution, it was frenzy. The courtyard of La Force was a place of nightmare. Corpses lay in heaps where prisoners had fallen. Blood ran across the stones, dark and sticky in the morning light. Men with wild eyes and stained coats surged forward, their weapons already slick with slaughter. For one instant, the Princess de Lamballe stood alone. She was dressed in white, fragile against the chaos, her pale features framed by soft hair. For that breath of time, silence held. Then the first blow struck the back of her head. She stumbled, her cap falling to the ground, her hair spilling loose like a banner of gold. Another strike met her forehead. She collapsed. The mob closed in. What followed was not execution, but dismemberment. Pikes, sabers, clubs, and fists rained down. Her small body disappeared beneath the weight of the crowd. The frenzy ended as suddenly as it had begun. The mob dragged her lifeless form into the street. A sword cut off her head. Her body was stripped bare, abandoned in filth. Her head, mounted on a pike, became the crown of a procession. A figure once seen gliding through Versailles, whispering at the side of a queen, was reduced to a grotesque trophy in the hands of her enemies. The procession wound through Paris, torches flaring in the wind, drums beating. Her head swayed above the crowd, her long hair drifting in strands. People leaned from windows, some screaming in horror, others cheering. Taverns opened their doors. Glasses were raised to liberty. The macabre parade grew with every step, and its destination was clear: the Temple prison, where the Queen herself was locked away. This was not victory. It was theater, and the audience was Marie Antoinette. The mob gathered beneath the prison walls, shouting for the Queen to appear. Their voices rose like a tide, demanding she look upon the ruin of her dearest friend. Accounts differ. Some say she was brought to the window and fainted at the sight. Others insist guards barred her from the view, though she heard the cries outside and knew too well what had happened. The truth may never be known. But the moment shattered her. That night, she wept until morning, haunted by the horror. Even in her final days, she would never forget what the revolution had shown her, that her enemies would not only destroy her, but everything she loved. The image of Lamballe's head carried on a pike raced beyond Paris. Within days it spread through Europe, whispered at courts from London to Vienna. It was not merely the death of a princess. It was a symbol of what the revolution had become. If the guillotine was a machine of state justice, the killing of Lamballe was the pure fury of a mob. It revealed the revolution's most terrible face, unmasked and unrestrained, and with her death came the birth of legend. Whispers spread of desecration beyond imagination. It was said that her body had been mutilated in obscene ways, her breasts cut away, her heart torn out and devoured by fanatics. Some claimed her corpse was violated, her genitals mutilated to mock her rumored intimacy with the queen. Others swore her head was taken to a hairdresser, powdered and curled before being shown to Marie Antoinette. There were even tales that a secret message for the queen was hidden within her hair, a final act of devotion. These stories flooded pamphlets and were repeated in salons. They were designed to shock, to horrify, to portray the revolutionaries as beasts beyond reason. But when examined, these whispers collapse. Contemporary records, even from those hostile to the queen, mention no such acts. Her pockets were inventoried, proof that her body was clothed when discovered. No witness confirmed the lurid mutilations. These tales were born of propaganda, designed to stir revulsion and rally monarchist support abroad. They survive because horror is seductive. But the truth is horror enough. She was bludgeoned, decapitated, stripped, and paraded through the streets. That reality requires no embroidery. The myth, however, tells us something about fear. The people of Europe needed to believe the revolution was monstrous, inhuman. The truth, that ordinary men, fueled by rage and fear, had done this, was perhaps even more terrifying. By dressing the event in grotesque fictions, they could imagine it as a nightmare apart from themselves. But the truth remained. The revolution had become its own executioner. For the revolutionaries in Paris, her death was not shame but triumph. Songs were sung of liberty, glasses were raised to her fall. They believed they had struck not at a woman but at a symbol of tyranny. Yet even among them, a shadow lingered. Some whispered uneasily of the frenzy, of the savagery, of the laughter that accompanied the mutilation. Others argued it was necessary, that the revolution could only survive through blood. The voice of Georges Danton, one of the leaders, still rang in their ears. To dare, dare again, and always dare, and France is saved. In that cry, moderation died. The September Massacres as a whole claimed nearly 1,000 lives. Priests, nobles, prisoners of every kind fell beneath the mob. But history remembers Lamballe because her death captured the essence of the violence. She was not a conspirator, not a politician, not a soldier. She was a friend. Her only crime was loyalty, and it was for that alone she was butchered. In her death, the revolution revealed its hunger. It was not satisfied with kings and queens. It demanded symbols. It demanded terror. Across the Channel in London, her fate was described with shuddering detail. Newspapers printed lurid accounts, mixing truth with invention, turning her into a martyr of monarchy. In Vienna, in Turin, in every court of Europe, nobles read of her death and trembled. If a princess could be dragged into the street and hacked apart, then no crown was safe. Her death became a warning, a specter haunting every throne. Yet beneath the rumors and the propaganda, a quieter truth endured. Lamballe had chosen her path. She had been offered safety in exile and had refused it. She had walked willingly into the fire to stand beside her queen. When the tribunal gave her a final chance to save herself, she refused to betray her friend. That choice, simple and unwavering, defined her fate. She died not as an aristocrat, nor as a political figure, but as a woman who would not abandon loyalty, even when it demanded her life. The mob saw her as a symbol of tyranny. To history, she became something else, the embodiment of devotion in an age of betrayal. Her death was cruel beyond measure, but it was also a mirror held up to the revolution. In her torn body, The world saw what fear and rage could do when unleashed. And in her refusal to renounce her queen, we see the fragile strength of friendship standing against a tide of hate. The Princess de Lamballe was not the only victim of September, but she became its face. Her head on a pike remains one of the most haunting images of the revolution, more unforgettable than the guillotine, more disturbing than any tribunal. For it was not law that killed her, it was the crowd. It was the voice of the people twisted by fear into a scream of blood. The murder of the Princess de Lamballe was not forgotten when the mob dispersed. It became a stain on the revolution, a memory too dark to be erased. In 5 days of slaughter, nearly 1,000 prisoners were cut down, yet her death stood apart. Others were priests, nobles, conspirators real or imagined. She was different. She was the friend of a queen, guilty only of loyalty, and that made her destruction unforgettable. For Paris, the killings were both pride and shame. Some called it a necessary purge, a wall of blood against traitors. Others lowered their eyes, unable to defend the frenzy that had left courtyards heaped with corpses. Silence settled, but it was not peace. The tide of executions rolled on. In January 1793, Louis XVI fell to the guillotine. By October, Marie Antoinette followed. The reign of terror devoured thousands. But the image of Lamballe's head on a pike still lingered, more haunting than the clean fall of the blade. For Marie Antoinette, the loss cut deepest of all. Imprisoned in the temple, she carried the memory of that September day. Whether she saw the head or only heard the cries outside, the wound was the same. She had asked her friend to return to France, and in that devotion Lamballe had found her death. Even in her final letters, fragments of grief for her lost companion flicker between the lines. When she mounted the scaffold months later, the shadow of Lamballe walked beside her. Beyond France, the story became legend. In London and Vienna, pamphlets spread lurid tales of mutilation, of rape, of cannibalism. They were lies, but they were believed, and they painted the revolution as a carnival of monsters. Royalists used her fate to rally support, to remind Europe that France had sunk into savagery. Even now, the rumors cling to her name. But the truth is enough. She was beaten, stripped, decapitated, paraded. That reality requires no invention. Her death forces us to face the power of crowds and the fragility of compassion when fear rules a city. Revolutions promise liberty, equality, fraternity. But in the September Massacres, those ideals were drowned in blood. The Princess de Lamballe's only crime was devotion to her queen. In a world unmoored by terror, devotion itself was treason. History remembers her less for her gentle life than for her savage end. She is the pale woman in white, stepping into a courtyard of corpses, refusing to curse her queen. She is the severed head swaying on a pike, carried beneath prison walls as a weapon of psychological torture. She is the reminder that hatred does not stop with kings and queens, but consumes all who stand beside them. Her story is not one of politics, but of loyalty meeting its price. And that price was everything.